So I'm Robert Polito, Director of the New School Graduate Writing Program, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to a reading we've all been hoping would happen for a long, long time. Allison Myers, Executive Director of Cave Canem, will introduce Toi in a moment, but I want to say now that Toi is one of our essential poets, sustaining the art and craft of poetry as a vivid, emotional, and intellectual high-wire act, even as she moves into surprising, always surprising terrain. Whether that's prose, along the lines of her memoir, The Black Notebooks, or fresh, uncharted poetry, like her new book, The Undertaker's Daughter. So please join me now in welcoming Allison, who will introduce Toi.
Thanks so much, Robert. It's so great to be here tonight and see this room of faces here for Toi and wonderful poetry, Cave Canem, and for ourselves. It's, of course, my great privilege to introduce Toi Derricotte tonight. But before I do, I want to acknowledge the New School, generous sponsor of tonight's program, and especially the contributions of Robert Polito and Lori Lynn Turner in making this a welcoming site for Cave Canem and our audience. Thanks are also due the funders whose support of this event and our many New York City programs is essential. The Mrs. Giles Whiting Foundation, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and the New York State Council on the Arts. Cave Canem's co-founder, Toi Derricotte, is the author of 4 previous collections of poems, including Tender, winner of the Patterson Poetry Prize. Her literary memoir, The Black Notebooks, was a New York Times Notable Book of the Year and a recipient of the Anisfield Wolf Book Award for Nonfiction. A professor of English at the University of Pittsburgh, she has received numerous other recognitions, among them 2 Pushcart Prizes, fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Guggenheim Foundation, the Lucille Medwick Memorial Award from the Poetry Society of America, the Barnes & Noble Writers for Writers Award from Poets and Writers, the Elizabeth Kray Award from Poets House for service to the field of poetry, and the Distinguished Pioneering of the Arts Award from the United Black Artists. This January, she was elected to the Academy of American Poets Board of Chancellors. Not too shabby. I am not afraid to be memoir. The opening line of Toi's extraordinary new book, The Undertaker's Daughter, is the reader's first intimation that this collection will lead us through new literary terrain. The poet expressly does not say, I am not afraid to write memoir, rather be memoir. This book is distinctly not an elegant recitation of a life. It is an excavation, an odyssey, an exorcism, an ode to joy and grief. To call The Undertaker's Daughter a memoir in any usual sense of the word would be as bold an understatement as describing the diary of Anne Frank as a teenager's confessional. Like Anne's diary, The Undertaker's Daughter is a transformational work of art. Yusef Komunyakaa describes The Undertaker's Daughter as shaped through a painful authority, and the reader can't help but see and feel the full force of this probing voice that bends time. Terence Hayes has written, the work of Toi Derricotte is lit by a fusion of intimacy and intensity. She has long sounded the depths of history, family, and self with an unflinching openness that moves beyond candor into visionary wisdom. If you live in this country, these United States of America, I believe you cannot help but find in Toi's chronicle of resistance, survival, and transcendence some version of your own story. Here is a poet writing intensely personal, searingly honest words that could have been forged in no other particular crucible than our deeply problematic, adolescent, and beloved country of desire, oppression, and idealism. The Undertaker's Daughter is text that deeply penetrates our national DNA, yet never stands on a soapbox and pronounces. The Undertaker's Daughter is, above all else, a work of art at its highest purpose, to reflect what we flawed Homo sapiens create and destroy on this earth, and moreover, to help us locate what we must do to become fully ourselves, to hear and claim our own voices, create meaningful language, and proclaim what it is to be human. The Undertaker's Daughter teaches us that the path is painful, joyful, unexpected, and encompasses not only us bipedal mammals, but perhaps a betta fish, an iris, tulips, a dog that defends itself, leaps through a glass door to escape a beating, or lives for 16 years to mother kittens and her human owner. The epigraph in the final poem, The Undertaking, is a quote from George Safaris. Quote, "But to say what you want to say, you must create another language and nourish it for years and years with what you have loved, with what you have lost, with what you will never find again." End quote. This is a language that, against all odds, Toi Derricotte has made. Please join me in welcoming the award-winning poet whose work, both on the page and in life, makes our world a more comprehensible and humane place, Toi Derricotte.
It's so beautiful to see you. Thank you so much for coming out to celebrate my book. There are a lot of people here who know about what it feels like to celebrate a new book. So thank you very much. It means a lot to me. And Allison, that was beautiful. Where's Allison? That was beautiful. And Robert, thank you so much where's Robert? Oh, thank you, Robert. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here at the New School. I had to remember that when I moved to New York, and my son can attest to this, when I was 27 years old, I took my first poetry workshops and came out as a poet at the New School. And really, I realized that the things I was writing, there in that workshop was, in a way, very much a beginning of this process that is in this book. So I have to be grateful for that. The Undertaker's Daughter, my father and my grandfather were undertakers. But the book is actually about the undertaking of a transformation. And for me, what I discovered in writing the book is that undertaking a creative act changes the creator's relationship to the subject that they're dealing with. And in this case, the subject was my past and especially the violence in my childhood. I will say that there is a section of the book, I'm going to be reading it about 5 minutes, that has some of that violence in it, and it may be disturbing for some people, and I'll let you know when I read it, and if it is disturbing and you need to walk out, I totally understand. So I'm going to start with this. George Safaris also begins my book, and this is his quote: "The terrible war nature wages to prevent the poet from existing." And I'd like to dedicate the reading to Ruth Stone, who I wish was here. Her daughter Marcia is here, and I'm so grateful for that. The exigencies of form. It is not the corpse. It is not the artifact. It is the soft thing with feathers. It is hope. It is what is said at the tenderest point. It is covered up with language and syntax. It is metered and measured. It has on its finest cloak. It may look like a king going out on a fine horse, or a diplomat in a car with black windows. It may cover itself and hide, but it is reaching. It is alive. Gershwin. It's a good thing to be friends with the dead. I'm starting to realize that with friends, being dead isn't that important. Take B.N. Gershwin, for example, who died at 38 from a brain tumor. The popular story, he keeled over at a cocktail party playing Rhapsody in Blue. And isn't that the best way to go? The note so alive in your hands that fear is blown right out of the socket. It's either a very small or a very large place we live in, our cosmos, our kitchen, so many generations packed up close. You realize lots of things as you get ready. The creaky doors of the heart open just like a one-track mind. I'm nobody, and yet I have this particular place on this particular bench, and nobody can do it better. I'm listening to that last hopeful song of Porgy's, the cripple in rags, taking off in his rickety goat cart, fearless. No matter how far, he's going to find his love. Oh, Lord, I'm on my way. I'm on my way to a heavenly land. How wonderful that either you understood this age so well that you captured the vibrations, or else you invented what we know. Did some lingering ancestor flood your heart with a blue note? Did some black woman play the scale for you? I wonder if it's so convincing with its sad happiness, as if there's a town right to the side of the stage where we'll be able to drop Porgy a line. Because Gershwin is telling us how happy he is to be driving his own poor goat cart. Oh, Lord, I'm on my way. Only 38, his work here over. Wish I could get tickets to Porgy and Bess, by the way. If there's any inside information in this room. We tried last night. It was like $800. So. Lighting the tulips. It's all about longing, how just before it enters the brain, shot straight out of the heart, it falls into sparks. Maybe just behind the vocal cords, where it touches the new words and transmutes into feeling. 4 shining branches that break and splinter like ice. I meditate, and after memory fades, there are these 4 sparklers firing. This is being with the self, as your hand would cup spring flowers. I slip the dark pink tulips from their sleeve, set them cautiously on the rim of the sink, bring the right-sized glass vase, and carefully lift each one, really tenderly. I think of their soft spined stems, of just how much force the fingers must close with, how much tension in the muscles between the power of dropping and lifting that will bring forth moment by moment a slow awareness of this certain caring, of the scissors on a stem, of the amazing lightness of this one's being between my fingers. Well, I think I'm going to read from this, the first section, burial sites. It's a long section. I think there are about 26 parts, and I'm just going to read 3 or 4. It starts with a quote from Peter Levine. Trauma is not what happens to us, but what we hold inside us in the absence of an empathetic witness. 1. The first was a bassinet. I don't remember what it was made of. I think it was one of those big white wicker baskets with wheels. When I couldn't sleep at night, my father would drag it into the kitchen. It was winter. He'd light the gas oven. I remember the room's stuffiness, the acrid bite of cold and fumes. My father didn't like crying. He said I was doing it to get attention. He didn't like my mother teaching me that I could cry and get attention. Nothing was wrong with me, and even if I was hungry, it wasn't time to eat. Sometimes I screamed for hours, and my father, I do remember this, would push his chair up to the lip of the bassinet and smoke as if he was keeping me company. After a few nights, he had broken me. I stopped crying. But when he put the bottle to my lips, I was too exhausted to drink. Three. My aunt brought home a present for me every day when she came from work. I'd wait by the kitchen door as soon as I could walk. Sometimes she'd fish down in her pocketbook, and the only thing she could find was a Tums, which she called candy. But mostly, she'd bring colored paper and pencils from the printing press where she worked. When I was 2 or 3, I began to draw things and to write my name. I wrote it backward for a long time, I-O-T. I drew houses, cars, money, animals. I actually believed that everything I drew was real. The house was a real house, as real as the one we lived in. I held it in my hand. It belonged to me like a chair or an apple. From then on, I did not understand my mother's sadness or my father's rage. If we could have whatever we wanted just by drawing it, there was nothing to miss or to long for. I tried to show them what I meant, but they shrugged it off, not seeing or believing. This sideways escape, the battle between my father's worst thought of me and this proof, this stream of something questioned and found lacking, which must remain nearly invisible, pressed into what leaks out as involuntarily as urine. A message which must be passed over the coals, raked, purified into a thin strand of unambiguous essence of the deep core. Five. Most times I liked my food. I didn't mind eating until my daddy started making me clean my plate and either struck me off my chair if I didn't or lifted me up by my hair and held me mid-air if I was slow. He wanted me to eat faster. He didn't have all day. He'd hold me off the floor until I pleaded. I'd sputter in fear and humiliation. I don't remember pain. But I had to button up before he put me down to do exactly what he had told me to do, fast. Slowness was a sign of insubordination. If I missed a pea or a crumb, I was trying to outwit him. I must have thought he was stupid. And if I pleaded that I hadn't seen the pea, he'd know I was lying. Your story is so touching till it sounds like a lie. I swallowed it down. I wiped that look off my face. But still, he would notice my bottom lip beginning to quiver. This was a personal insult, as if I had taken a knife and put it to his face. If my brow wrinkled in a question, "Do you love me, Daddy? How could you hurt me like this?" This implied I was pursuing my own version of the truth, as if I were his victim. It was a war of wills, as he so clearly saw. And these were my attempts to subvert him, to make my will reign. He was the ruler of my body. I had to learn that. He had to be deep in me, deeper than instinct, like the commander of a submarine during times of war. And 2 more, 16. My mother shopped after work every Thursday, so my father would come home and fix dinner for me. He'd stop at Fiedel's Market and get a big steak with a bone in it. He'd bring it home and unwrap the brown paper slowly, savoring one corner at a time, like someone doing a striptease or opening a trove of stolen diamonds. He'd brag about how much money he had spent. He'd broil it right up next to the flame, spattering grease, fire, and smoke, only a couple of minutes on each side, cooked, still bloody, nearly raw, the way we liked it, he said, different from your mother. He'd say he liked it, just knocked over the head with a hammer and dragged over a hot skillet. His eyebrows would go wild, and he'd rub his hands together like a fly. And I'll just read a little bit of the afterword. I hear in myself a slight opposition, a wounded presence saying, I am me, I know who I am. But I am left with only a narrow hole, a thin tube that the words must squeak through. Now I watch it, watch every word. It wasn't my father's thought I took in, it was his language. It is the language in me that must change. Thank you, Monica. Sunday afternoon at Claire Carlisle's. My mother and father, light-skinned but too new to make the uppercut, were nevertheless, God, I love a New York audience. Oh my God. Okay. Sunday afternoons at Claire Carlisle's. My mother and father, light-skinned but too new to make the uppercut, were nevertheless welcomed into the marble foyer under an icebox-sized chandelier to mix martinis with double-edged men and women trained to outwit and outwhite the whites. Almost all were light and straight-featured enough to pass. Some did, some didn't. Claire's brother Bob passed. If seen weekdays, he wasn't to be spoken to. Light and dark did the same. An inward move to protect those fortunate enough to choose. You know, you couldn't pass unless black people let you pass, right? But why did my mother, who looked as white as Loretta Young, see Bob one weekday walking toward her up Woodward Avenue and cross the street to the other side? Why? When anyone would just have seen two white people. It was something in my mother not visible. In her mind's eye, she was black and wore the robe of it over her fine features. But just in case some inner misstep might betray him, the inner world being vast and treacherous, as if they were slaves running for their lives. Thank you. Thank you. You know how your parents tell you these stories and you don't know what the hell they told it to you for, and they don't give you an explanation? Yeah. And, you know, it just stuck with me. Well, what did that mean, you know? She never told me. And I better not ask. So, okay, the next section is called A Memory of the Future, and it begins with a quote, joy is an act of resistance. And I'm going to read the last poem in that section first. because there's a group of poems in this section about a betta fish named Telly. My granddaughter named Telly, the fish. She's here today. And actually, I've figured out this cycle of poems is a love cycle to Telly the fish. And so it wasn't until later, after I bought him, that I realized Telly, a betta fish, is a killer fish. And so actually, the love cycle is sort of like me falling in love with a killer. Ow. How Craig Foster enabled me to write the poems I'm writing now and gave me this voice. When I told him I bought a betta, he sent all kinds of emails about its beauty and natural traits, how it's a killer and has to roam alone, about that beautiful big blue or red floaty tail, bigger than its body, how the male, believe it or not, blows bubbles for the eggs to rest in, making a clear quilt over the top, just in case some nice female comes along. He sent news that, to me, read like poetry, how they can stay in tiny fish bowls because in Thailand and Cambodia, they live in puddles in the rice paddies, and when their puddle gets dirty, they just hop into the next. It made me see Telly in a new light, and given sight, I began to think a language for part of myself that before could not speak. I have never been able to write about his mother's death. She was my best friend since grade school, then in her 30s, hooked up with the wrong man and got murdered. Craig grew up without a mother and died of diabetes in his early 40s. Once, in our 20s, when I was crying about a man who had left me, she commanded me to stop. She was a strong Black woman and didn't believe in tears. 20 years after she died, a woman came up to me after a reading and asked me to sign her book. She pronounced her name several times, Amanda, not Amanda, just the way my friend said hers. Then she said, "Write because you taught me how to cry." Had I lived and she died because of that one difference between us? The Telly poems. I don't think I can sit down. I'll try it. For Telly the fish. Telly's favorite artist was Alice Neal. When he first came to my house, I propped up her bright yellow shade with open window and a vase of flowers, postcard size, behind his first fishbowl. I thought it might give him something to look at, like the center of a house you keep coming back to, a hearth, a root for your eye. It was a wondering in me that came up with that thought, a kind of empathy across my air and through his water. Maybe the first word I propped up between us in case he could hear. Telly would stare at that painting for hours, hanging there with his glassy eyes wide open. At night, he wanted the bottom as if it were a warm bed. He'd lie there, sort of dreaming, his eyes gray and dim and thoughtless. For months, he came back to her, the way a critic or lover can spend a whole lifetime on the long study of one great work. I don't know why he stopped. Maybe it was when he first noticed me, the face above my hand feeding. For sometimes when I'd set the food on top, he'd still watch me, eye to eye, as if saying, food isn't enough. Once, when I bent, he jumped up out of the water and kissed my lips. What is a fish's kiss like? You'd think it would be cold, slimy, but it was quick, nippy, hard. Maybe it was just what I expected. For all our fears of touch, it takes so long to learn how to take in. When he stopped coming to the top, I guess I did all the wrong things. The fish medicine that smelled, measured carefully, for his ounce of weight, for his gills worked so hard, and he lay still, tipped over slightly, like a dead boat. How do you stop the hurt of having to breathe? After, I took him to the middle of the yellow bridge, right near the Andy Warhol Museum. I had put a paper towel in a painted egg and laid him in it. And at the top, I opened the casket and emptied him out into the water. There's that famous portrait of that Alice Neal did of Warhol in the Andy Warhol Museum. So it was a good place. Special ears. I liked him for his tail fin, which was long like a mermaid's and flowed like a silver blue ruffle in the water. Larger than you'd expect a little fish's tail to be. Generous, excessive, a bit astonishing, like a girl with too much hair. Sometimes he would rise like a submarine, straight up, as if he would nip my finger, "Get out of my water." His mouth would open like a little scoop of blackness and let out one bubble like a smoke ring of my father's, a message from the underworld. An apology. An apology to Tully the revolutionary. Love or respect, my father said. You can't have both. Last night, after the reading, I'm sorry. I think I'm just going to go stand over there. Okay. All right. Last night, after the reading, the audience climbed to their feet and cheered you, as if you were a rock star. Viva Telly! Telly lives! One woman explained, you only let them think you were a fish, but right now you are in Jamaica or Cuba with Asada Shakur. They giggled at our kiss, and I thought, now they see the real me, not a poet, just some pathetic old woman who made a lover of a fish. So I reasoned, after all, you weren't real, you were only a symbol. Telly, I never meant to betray you, just to distract them while I handed myself a robe. When the goddess makes love to me, this is for you, Robin. She has to pass through my father. She has to find him where he sits in a corner inside me, cold as a turd. I can't reach him anymore. I don't have the strength to yank him out and blow on his breasts. She has to tuck her fingers between his thighs and warm him slowly. First the shoulders and the tops of his arms. She has to coax the crying boy to walk through the dead, coming on tiptoe. Sometimes he can't find his way, feeling in the dark with his blunt fingers. And sometimes he stands there, dumbstruck, his body trembling between us like a little bird's. Untitled. 10 days after her death, I nap on my mother's bed, And for the first time, it seems in years, in front of the gentle eyes of the Blessed Virgin, my mother's Palm Sunday palms folded behind the frame, I feel my clitoris throb. Aroused? In my mother's bed? Before the Virgin? I press my thighs together as if my hands must remain clean. I touch the tip of my left breast until the nipple grows hard and lifts. My thighs tighten. Embraced in this pleasure, as in a prayer that goes up from my whole body, I have gone beyond some dirtiness, some act I cannot conceive my mother would have condoned. Yet here, now, I have touched some deeper female presence that her death gives me as a gift. So I think I'm going to go on to the last section. Well, I can't resist reading this little one, a little prayer to Our Lady, since that other one was there. So all day I go by the Christmas tree bulb, orange, in the little altar of shells that I set up and keep lit at the top of the stairs, so that rising now I rise to praise her, to remember the sacredness of my work. Perhaps she likes orange light thrown softly against her, for she looks divine. My house seems richer, more alive, less lonely. With her here, I am allowed to believe. And from the last section, which, as Allison quoted, begins with a quote from George Sepharis. But to say what you want to say, you must create another language and nourish it for years and years with what you have loved, with what you have lost, with what you will never find again. And I'm just going to read a few sections from this, The Undertaking, the last section of the book. The Undertaking. My brother Jay, my half-brother, 18 years younger than I am, brings our father's ashes when he visits me in Pittsburgh. They have been on a shelf in his basement for 20 years, wrapped in a kind of plain brown wrapper universally understood to be hiding something dirty. We slash open the paper to uncover a drawer-shaped plastic box. Jay pulls a string, and the top pops off as easily as the lid on a box of oatmeal and reveals, too quickly, the pebbles of our father, the chalky issue. We have walked to the neighborhood golf course. My father loved golf more than anything good for him, and decide to drop him off at the top of a little bridge over a spout of clear water. Jay pours most of the ash. I run down to dislodge the fallen plastic bag from a few prickly weeds and shake out a half cup more. We hold each other around the waist, and Jay says his prayer of the moment. Rest here now, safe, near your daughter. Whatever you did, whatever you have done, God chose you to be our Father for a good reason. We love you and will never forget you. I feel a vacancy, a quiet that may signal an end. I court nothing, no drama, and yet I wait to see if it's over, really over. How do you end a book? How do you end a lifelong obsession? Writing itself is a triumph. It changes the past by changing the act of repression. It cries out against violence. It confronts the command to subjugate oneself. When you have been silent, dead for so long, encased and buried, the oppressor's voice is the first one you hear. It is the way you talk to yourself. Then the most childish voice arises, tender, vulnerable. It has to start from the same place it was buried. Many abused children never love again, never trust. Their hands pass it down to their children. The body holds memories it will never be caught again. Talk isn't enough. You can never comprehend. At some point, something happens. A door closes. Your boyfriend goes out for a smoke, and in less than a second, your stomach tightens like a grill. Alarm bells ring, ring in the amygdala. Daddy's home. Is it possible to change everything that has happened by looking at the past in a different way, not denying anything, but perhaps inserting some detail that pries open the heart so that more light floods out of it? When I knew I would not get well, that I would never be the girl my parents wanted, that no matter how much therapy I did and how many books I wrote, I was stuck with myself, that I had to accept my past and live with it. Then I knew my parents' struggles. They too battled demons that they couldn't make go away, no matter how much they suffered, no matter what they did or said, no matter how much they loved and wanted to be good. And these are the last two I'll read. Once in a dream, I saw my father as a pasty white dog, starved, ignorant, graceless. I said to myself, that is what evil looks like. As I grew stronger, my father grew weaker, until a frightened boy lived inside me. Rest here now, safe, near your daughter. In bringing myself forth, I had become his protector. The poem is change, the poem in change. The end of the poem is change. To change in the poem, to change by the poem, to hold the change in the poem, to be changed by the poem is change. To change by writing the writing is change. To hold the change in the writing, to hold the change by writing. To write through the change, to breathe through the change, to write by breathing, to breathe by writing. The change is breathing, the change is writing. To hold the breath, to hold the writing, to hold the change, to hold it, and let it go. Thank you.
You go, Mom.
We have some time for Q&A, and we ask that if you do have a question, wait for the microphone to reach you so that we can clearly hear your question and it will be recorded. Thanks.
Thank you very much. That was beautiful. The singing it's the first I've ever heard that, and it was beautiful. Is it a way to write? I mean, do you sing as you write and create, and what prompts you to sing some things in your reading and otherwise?
I didn't start singing until the night before I did my first reading of this in Pittsburgh, where I teach. And I just kept feeling that something was wrong, that I was reading it, but I wasn't really reading something that I needed to read. And then I remembered there's a poem in here called "The Night I Stopped Singing Like Billie Holiday." And the last part of that poem talks about me singing one night at a reading, and people, saying to me, "Oh God, that was really good." And I said, "I sang, And I started thinking, I wonder if I sang, if I could, it was almost like I wanted to break through the words on the paper. Do you know what I mean? Like that was the last hold, And as I was writing this book, I became very aware of the voices in the writer's head, that as you're writing, you hear voices. And I began to be aware that the voices I was hearing, they were making sounds. The words had sounds to them, and they weren't, I wanted to put those sounds in. That's what I started thinking the night before the reading. And that was a couple months ago, and it just felt right, if that answers your question. It really felt. Now, I don't feel right singing all of them, but especially the burial sites, that is really what I felt good about. It's something else too. Singing it, I'm performing it. I'm not living it. It's a separation from the text, if that makes sense. Okay.
I wanted to ask, when you write, it's very intense. Your writing is very, very intense. How do you separate your life coming out of the writing?
How do I separate my life
Yes.
coming out of the writing, or the writing coming out of the life?
Both.
The only way it gets separated for me is when a book is over. It's like, this book was, I guess, about 20 years, and it doesn't get separated until that last piece of the book goes in place, and then it really is over. The whole thing is over, the life part of it and the book part of it. And that's when I started understanding that this book was not just about writing the story, it was about a transformation, and how by recognizing how this transformation happened, that was really what was the undertaking of the whole thing, the process. It's almost like, I hate to say that, but it's almost like you get your life to then make art. And but then it's also a way of bringing this different kind of wholeness back to you. It's like taking the internal chaos and making an object that's external, and it has order and form, and it's not you anymore, it's this thing out there. Boom, goodbye. Yeah, 20 years, right. Yeah. A lot of therapy, a lot of pills. Yeah.
Toi, can you say something about your decision to write a book of poems in so many different forms? The prose poems, the narrow, skinny poems, the medium-sized poems, about, changing all the time.
Well, I realized as I was writing this book that everything I've done as a poet is about resistance. Cave Canem, I think this comes from this deep place in me as a child that, was struggling to have a voice. and was resisting whatever somebody said was what should be the form, you know. And when I was at NYU and in graduate school, you know, we never read a black writer. We never read in 1984 a black poet in graduate school. And I think there's just something in me that says, okay, you say this is what a book of poems should be? Oh, okay, the hell with that. You know, it's like just that resistance to the idea that somebody has, this is what a poem is. And, you know, that's what I saw, that African American poets, you know, were hearing this. And it's not a good thing. You know, you have to be someplace where it is possible to bring forth everything in you, all of the voices. And so that's what I was thinking about. Does that make sense, Alicia? Yeah. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Hello? Okay. Thank you. I wanted to ask about the Telly poems, because we had to read the book in class, and it was an excellent book, and it's a very serious book, and then you get to these poems about a fish. Can you, no offense, can you explain them?
Well, that section of the book is called A Memory of the Future. And what had happened is the first poem is about the day my father died. I went and saw his body. And then that night I went home and I had this dream. And in the dream, I was fearless and I felt so fabulous. And I felt like, oh my God, I'm floating, I'm flying. This is so fabulous. I'm a different person. And I woke up and said that to my husband, you know, I'm so different. I feel wonderful. And then as I was putting my feet over the side of the bed and going down to touch the floor, something in me said, your father is dead. And I knew why I felt so happy. And then I say, but why did the fear come back? I mean, my father was truly dead. But why did the fear, why couldn't I just stay in that place? But it went away. The memory of that moment went away. And I had to go through a process. You know, I say it was a memory of the future, you know. So the Telly poems are in there because of that vulnerable self that starts to get unburied. And for me, that connection to that fish was powerful to me. And I think some people, their connections to animals, you know, this is deeply, you know, brings out certain things that you can't bring out in other ways. And that, for me, was that first step. Does that make sense? Yeah. But I'll tell you something. Until I understood this book, they were very weird. You know, I would look at those poems and say, what the hell are you, what is this about? And then when in the process of putting the book together, I understood why they were there. Yeah.
Hi, Toi.
Hi.
First of all, I'm going to go home and write about my fish when I get home, so thank you.
Is he a beta?
There are about 5 of them, so
Wow.
yeah.
Okay.
Big family.
Wow.
So what is the poet's worst enemy, and how do you diffuse that enemy, do you think? I was struck by the quote about, you know, the
Terrible
what
war.
the poet has to struggle against, and
Yeah. Well, for me, I had to fight with the inside demons. And I think in doing that, I fought the outside demons. But I had to start with the demons inside. And I think in some ways, you know, I was thinking about my father, you know, making me control myself to such an extent. And, you know, I don't know. Sometimes you wonder if the bad things that happen to you are part of what brings about the good stuff. And so, because I really had to be very, very, what is the word I want? Determined and sort of disciplined to stay with those inner demons. But, you know, I didn't do it overnight. Like I said, it's like 20 years. I mean, some of the poems in that first section, Burial Site, were written, a couple of the parts were written 20 years ago. I mean, they didn't look anything like this. But, you know, it takes that long to separate out material that's emotional material. Sometimes when it's so emotional, you really can't see it as art for a long, long time. You have to work with it a lot to finally get it. You know, what's the difference between diary and, you know, writing a poem?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Our thanks to Toi for a memorable evening we won't ever forget. And I hope everyone can stick around because there are lots of books to buy and have signed. Toi will be at the table. You can chat with her and buy a copy of The Undertaker's Daughter. There are refreshments provided by the new school. Talk to each other, have fun. Talk to us, learn about Cave Canem. Thank you for being such a beautiful audience tonight. And enjoy yourselves.